Hello, everyone, and welcome to our EdTech Team Online Hangout on Air. Tonight, we're going to be talking about project-based learning. And welcome all you teacher leaders who are in the cohort right now, teacher leaders who were in previous cohorts, or other people who are interested in project-based learning. As you guys are joining us, please introduce yourself in the comment section on the YouTube Live event. And also, that's a great place that you can ask your questions. You can also use the EdTech Team Online hashtag to ask your questions as well. So I'm Tracy Purdy, and I'm the Director of Online Learning for the EdTech team, so welcome. We also have Dominique Dines on the call. She is going to be managing the back channel, so if you guys have any questions, she'll make sure that they get answered. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you guys to our guest tonight. Really excited for this evening's topic and our guest. Tonight we have Suzie Boss, and Suzie Boss is an author of many different books, an educational consultant. She also is on the national faculty with the Buck Institute, which is are getting a lot of our resources and going to for information on project-based learning. She's also a longtime contributor of Edutopia. Her focus is really on how teaching and learning can improve lives and transform communities. So, Suzie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm just delighted that you reached out. Really nice to connect and learn what you're doing with your program. It sounds wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I think we should just dive right in. And I think one of the most important questions is, why project-based learning? Why is it so important? Why should teachers be taking time to do project-based learning in their classroom?
Sure. You know, we could talk all night about this topic. This is kind of my passion, but I'll start with just a few, I think, trends that are really driving what we're seeing as a global movement interest in project-based learning. For me, one of the top reasons has to do with student engagement. You know, I think any of us who have looked at the research on engagement know that the graph kind of goes like this. The longer students spend in school, the less they report feeling engaged. That's a pretty dispiriting data point for anybody who cares about kids, which is all teachers. So I think turning that graph around, finding a way for students to feel like they have a voice, to stop asking the question, when will I ever need to know this? I think relevant projects that connect with students' lives and their interests, they just take that question out of the equation, because the purpose is really apparent. When a project is well designed, when it connects to something meaningful, students dig in because they do see the purpose. They do see the reason for needing to learn something so that they can solve a problem or answer a question that matters to them. So engagement is really high on my list. There are a number of other factors that I think are leading school systems to project-based learning. There's just the academic outcomes are a big one. When students go from a more cursory look at information to taking content in so that they can apply it and create something new, you get into the deeper learning. You get from coverage to transfer. And that matters for retention of information, for really mastery of content, as well as, and this is one more reason, I think a big one, the development of those skills outside the content areas. So if students are going to, by the time they finish school, if they're going to learn to collaborate, to think critically, to solve problems, they need some practice. We can't assume that they're going to pick those skills up out of the air if they're doing more memorization and test prep sorts of learning activities. They really need the right sized experiences to guide them. So those are a few of the big reasons that I think are driving this interest really all around the world. I've worked on almost every continent with teachers and schools, and so it's a big movement. It's very exciting.
Yes. That's definitely very true. I want to just take a minute too to just point out. So I have Suzie's book. It's called Project-Based Teaching, and it's a fantastic resource with really just very clear descriptions of how to do project-based learning and examples of project-based learning, which really helped me to really understand how to do it. So with that said, besides this book, what are some of the best ways that you could help, or tips that you could give teachers to get started with project learning?
Sure. And I appreciate the plug for the book. It just came out last week, so we're very excited about that. I think some of those getting started suggestions, I guess I'll say this first and then I'll offer some really specific strategies. But I think one thing that's reassuring to many teachers is that if you're going to go in the direction of project-based learning, you don't want to forget everything you know about good teaching. The practices that you're already comfortable with very likely are going to have a place in well-designed project-based learning. They might come in at a different time, or you might be using some of those strategies more strategically. So that said, it's not a wholesale reinvention of teaching and learning, but it is strategic. So a few of the ways to get started, if you're not sure, you haven't seen projects in action yourself, sometimes borrowing an existing project idea from another teacher. You mentioned the Buck Institute for Education. There's a very robust project library there with, you can search by grade level, content area, and see lots of examples of not just in the big picture, what was this project about, but how did teachers go about planning it? What did a typical week look like? What were the assessments? You can really kind of get into the nitty gritty by looking at someone else's plan and then adapting it to fit your needs. You might be a different grade level or a different content area or some sort of a tweak that you'd want to make. But sometimes looking at another plan is a great way to get started, or joining a teacher who's more experienced, partnering up. If you have someone in your building, someone in your district, a friend that you've met online and is doing project-based learning, and it's a great way to collaborate, to help each other through the process and to learn from someone more experienced. Another tip I often share with teachers is to think about a unit you've taught many times, perhaps in a more traditional way, but the content inside and out. You're something you're very familiar with. So start there. Take that unit and turn it into a project. You're going to be a lot more comfortable with the content because you've taught it perhaps multiple times, and you'll think about what would it take to turn what I've done before into a project. Do I need an authentic problem or question at the start instead of just launching in or giving an assignment? Could we approach this through an inquiry lens and really have kids asking questions? Could we lead towards some sort of solution or problem solving or authentic product? Is there an audience out there who would care about what students are doing? All those are ways to start moving in the direction of project-based learning. And you may not do it all at once. You might add one new feature to that unit the next time, revise it again, see how it goes. So starting with something familiar. And I think also, last tip maybe is to start small. Don't feel like you need to do an entire semester-long project on your first time out of the blocks. That's perhaps too much to bite off. So start small, even think of a mini project. I often describe mini projects that get teachers and students kind of in the mode. What does it feel like to go through the cycle of learning that happens in PBL? So those are a few kind of getting started tips. And again, in the book, we talk through lots more examples, and you hear from teachers themselves about what helped them get off to a good start.
That's awesome. You're already helping some teachers who have started their plans, and they're saying, that might be my problem with my current plan because I'm trying to do this with content that I've never taught before. And then also somebody making a comment just about the fact that they hear all the time, like, why am I learning this? Why am I ever going to use this? And with project-based learning, we can make that learning really authentic for our students.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Why they're learning that. So awesome. Could you ever share an example of a great project-based learning unit that you've maybe seen taught before?
Absolutely. At this point, there are hundreds of them, but I'll start with a couple that we mentioned in the book, just to kind of set the stage and also to let your audience know that there are some project videos that really show a project from start to finish. I think we have 6 videos on the Buck Institute site, 6 new ones that are, we did the videos at the same time I was working on the book. So a very collaborative project. And you really get to see from start to finish, how did this, So an elementary example that we feature, and it's one of the videos, students are designing tiny houses. Perhaps you've seen very small footprint houses This project was done in California, where housing is expensive and people are looking for solutions. And kids perhaps had seen some tiny homes and wondered, what are those things? And so I think their fourth graders do a design project where they're designing them, but what they're making models. But what's wonderful about this project is they're not just doing it for their own entertainment or interest. They're designing for actual clients. So there are real clients whom they have to interview, learn what their interests are, their needs, their family size. Then they go through the whole design and iteration process, get some advice from an expert, and finally present their finished prototypes to those real clients and get some feedback. So that's a really nice one from an elementary perspective. As you watch the video, you can see how the teacher has artfully worked in her literacy goals, her math standards. She's, doing learning stations. She's doing many of the things that teachers are often already familiar with, but it's all happening in the context of the project. So that's a nice elementary example. A high school example, this one is actually an Edutopia video called Mission to Mars. It's a brand new video on the Edutopia site, and it's in a pretty high-powered AP physics course. So teachers who are wondering, can you do project-based learning as the content gets more rigorous, as students get into those higher-level courses, and we worry so much about content coverage, is this a possibility? And I think that example, where students are designing models of landers to land on Mars, like Mars rovers. They're getting critiqued from engineers who work in this field. They're doing very collaborative work, but you can see the rich, deep content that they are digging into as they work through the project and come to the final test day, which is quite exciting as they drop their landers from a second-story balcony and see, if the cargo makes it to the landing site. So I think those are, a couple examples that are happening with, one teacher. It's not a huge collaborative, we need 10 teachers involved on this. These are more, I wouldn't call them starter projects, but I think they're more accessible to a lot of teachers who might not feel like they're ready to do a project that's going to involve multiple content areas and, a big team. These are single teacher led projects, I think led to great learning results for students.
Yes, definitely. We had a question come in about your thoughts on the pros and cons of individual versus partner versus group with project-based learning.
Mm-hmm. I think we see the whole wide range of what collaboration might look like. I think any successful project is going to have some level of collaboration. It doesn't mean that students might not produce their own individual products at the end, but getting to that point, they're going to have some collaboration in terms of peer critique and feedback. Working with experts or folks maybe outside the classroom who are going to give them some advice or that they're going to go to for research. So there is collaboration built in, even if they're doing some individual work. I think it's more common in project-based learning to see some sort of a team effort for the final product and presentation of learning. And I think one of my messages to teachers is to think hard about why collaboration needs to be built into a project, because we know that students will ask, why do I have to work with a team member? Why can't I do this by myself? And if there's not a good reason, I think students who develop a voice in experiences like PBL, they will push back, say, well, I could accomplish this by myself. So a well-designed project, if collaboration is one of the goals, if helping students develop their skills as collaborators, if that's one of the learning goals, you have to think about, why is collaboration so essential to this project? And there could be many good reasons. And in the book, actually, I kind of go through a number of them. Just a couple examples. It may be that the project requires some specialization. So just like the world outside of school, where collaboration is how, teamwork gets done in all kinds of industries, that's happening because problems are so complex that there's often a need to bring specialists together. So maybe in PBL, this is a chance for your students to specialize, and students will take on different roles in the project. It may be that the project's just too big for one person to handle alone, or the timeline is too tight. So there could be lots of reasons why collaboration is essential, but you need to think through why do we need teams on this project in the first place? I think that's a really good design question for teachers to ask themselves.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. And to be able to have that answer for your students as well will make it so that they understand why they need to work in a group. Fantastic. What are some of the other common questions that you get around project-based learning?
I think one of the concerns teachers often have is about content coverage. They'll worry that, okay, this project's going to take up so much time. What about the content we know we have to get to, or perhaps in a standards-driven environment, as many teachers are? And that's a realistic concern. So I think the way to think about that is to be very intentional about the design of the project to make sure you're really addressing some strong, important learning goals in that project. It's not outside of your content area. It's not added on to your curriculum. I think this is one of the myths or misconceptions about project-based learning that we need to tackle head on and help teachers see that if you're doing a project, this is the curriculum for that time, while the project is underway. There's going to be, some rich learning that goes on. You're going to perhaps do some traditional teaching as part of the project. A lecture is not unheard of in PBL. A test is not unheard of as part of a project, but it's woven into, the timeline of the project.
Wonderful. That's really good. I know that we definitely have questions on that it does feel overwhelming. How am I going to teach everything else then?
Right.
We had another question come in, and I love this one because it builds on, I think, one of your 7 components of the book, talking about like how much instruction is needed on like how students dialogue, how students compromise, how students can work together as a group. And I know you have a whole section on building the culture for your classroom for project-based learning.
Absolutely. That culture piece is so critical. A good PBL classroom, kind of compare it to either a friendly neighborhood or a very productive workplace where people are about something important. They show up with a purpose and they're ready to dive in and want to work together. That takes real intention to build that culture. It doesn't happen automatically. And I think PBL is one of those, doing projects is one of those opportunities to kind of assess where are your students starting. If this is brand new to them, if they're coming into their first project experience and they've only ever kind of followed the teacher's lead and waited to be called on. And, I think we all know what more traditional classrooms look like. You've got to be realistic and think about, all right, if we want students to collaborate successfully, we're going to have to teach them how. They're going to need some modeling. They're going to need some role play. They're going to need some strategies. One of the misconceptions that students often make is that if they're in a team and they need to come to some agreement, they have to make a decision about what direction the project's going to go, what their solution might be. It's not about the loudest voice carries the day. It's really teaching them to come to consensus. And that means everybody on the team has to feel like we're okay, we're ready to go ahead with this. And getting to consensus requires negotiation, it requires dialogue. It might something as simple as sentence stems to help students negotiate a hard conversation. How do you disagree without breaking your teammates' hearts or losing friends, all those sorts of things. We see this happening as early as elementary and then all the way through high school. Teachers who are doing this approach to instruction are really careful to build that culture so that students are building those skills. And you can imagine if you're in a school system that's looking at PBL across the grade levels, and if your students, let's say you're a middle school student or teacher, you're getting kids coming up from elementary who have had project experiences, they're going to be pretty good to go when it comes to working together. But if it's brand new to them, they hit high school, they've never done this before, you're going to have to pause and think about how do I build those skills, those really important life skills that are going to carry on well beyond this first project.
Great. I would love to open it up for some questions. Just put it out there for people, see if they want to add any questions right now. There's been great discussion on the back channel.
Great.
And then people helping each other as they're putting in questions and sharing examples of projects that they've done.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great to see that. And Maybe you have a few places that you can direct us for resources, some of
Sure.
your places to get extra information about project-based learning.
Absolutely. I know you've already mentioned the Buck Institute, and it's a great go-to resource. The site has a lot of material, rubrics that you can adapt and use with your students around skills like collaboration or critical thinking, both elementary and upper school samples, as well as I'd point you to the project-based teaching rubric that's on the Buck Institute site that's can be great for teachers who are embarking on this path. It helps them think about, am I developing in some of these teaching practices? Am I accomplished? Am I kind of at the gold standard? Where am I? And what are my goals as a teacher? So those are a few things there. Edutopia has, again, a wealth of resources for teachers, many video case studies of projects. You have to do a little bit of digging sometimes to find them, but if you search by topic, if grade level, if you're looking for project-based learning videos, you will find many there. And I think those are really helpful both for individual teachers to look at and get that sense of, okay, I'm kind of swimming in a classroom environment. I'm starting to feel like, what does that culture feel like? What does assessment look like in PBL? I can kind of see some examples. They're also great discussion items for teams of teachers to sit down and look at together. Say, how do we feel about this? How close are we to implementing some of these practices in our school, in our classrooms? Where do we need to grow? What can help us grow? So those are a couple. I would say on Twitter, one of my favorite hashtags is PBL Chat. There's a weekly hosted chat around project-based learning, but you can use that hashtag anytime, not just during the Tuesday chats. And there's a large community of PBL advocates at varying levels of experience who will chime in and help you. And I have used it to work with teachers from a distance and bat around driving questions and talk about audience. And, it's just a great resource. So those are a few places I think that you can find a lot of support.
That's great. I love the idea of the PBL chat hashtag because that's my first go-to. Go to Twitter, go to a hashtag, see what I can find there, and it is amazing how many resources there are.
Exactly, yeah.
We do have a question about if you have any suggestions on how to get students to lean in a direction that you're trying to lead them. She said something, I heard that we're trying to be like a magician to.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's a little bit of tension there because as much as possible, you're looking for student direction. You're looking for student agency. You're looking for students to ask questions that they want to answer. You also have your content goals that you're needing your students to arrive at. So in the design of the project, you're thinking about what are those learning goals we need to arrive at. So that's in your mind as a, kind of the architect of this project experience. Then you dive into it and students may have questions that veer in all kinds of directions and you feel like, oh my gosh, where's this going? So there's nothing wrong with kind of redirecting, reining in some of those questions, but I would not totally discount them. Kids may ask questions that are fantastic, and you might need to adjust your expectations a little. Perhaps this project is going to go in a slightly different direction than you anticipated. We're still going to get to those learning goals. It's just not exactly as I imagined. Other times, students might ask a question that's a terrific question, but it's way off in another direction. So I would create some way to capture that question, a whiteboard or a parking lot for great questions that we're not going to answer in this project. You don't want the questioning to stop. But you also don't want students so wandering all over the place. There needs to be some, you're kind of going on a journey together and you need to start somewhere and end somewhere together. So kind of keeping something of a map, some checkpoints along the way are really helpful to make sure students are understanding what they need to, that they're accomplishing what they need to get to that final, wonderful, excellent result that you're all hoping for. But I think encouraging a lot of student questions and then not being afraid to say, that's a great question, but we're not going to get to it in this project. We might in the next project. There might be a place to design, an opportunity to design a project with that in mind. But I think artful teachers are pretty good at encouraging questions and, you know, keeping student curiosity really alive is a big part of PBL. So you want to keep that questioning going, but I think you can kind of artfully direct and redirect some of those conversations.
Perfect. They love the idea of the question parking lot.
Yeah.
And one more question here. What would you suggest as the best way to take one of your favorite projects that you have students do and turn it more into a PBL unit?
Yeah, I think this question is getting at the difference between projects and PBL. And I think most of us understand that projects have been sort of that kind of fun hands-on activity that happens after the serious learning is over, if that's a shared understanding here of projects. I think parents sometimes have that in their mind. If they hear that, oh, our kids are going to start doing project-based learning, they may immediately, I've heard parents say, oh, we've got to go to the craft store, we need sugar cubes, or, they're imagining the stuff they did for activities is the way I think of them, those sorts of projects. And I think what you want to do is take a good look at that project that you may have done in the past. Is there something valuable there? Was there really an opportunity to use that as maybe the starting or ending point for something deeper, something richer? What's it missing? Is there some good, rich, deep inquiry that's required to get to that product that may be the whole focus of that activity that you've done in the past? Is there an audience who's going to care about the work that students are producing? Does it connect to solving a real problem? Those are some of the questions you can ask yourself and start thinking about, we've always done this activity or this project, you might call it. Is it time to let go of it? Or is it time to rethink how we might use it in the context of PBL? It may be that you do that activity right smack in the middle of a project-based learning unit because it does have some value. Maybe there's a hands-on component that helps students get their thinking out in the world so you can take a look at it in a very concrete way. But it may not be the final culmination of PBL. So I think asking yourself those design questions, is there a real inquiry here? Is there a real challenge or question that we're embarking on as a group of learners? Is somebody going to care about this work at the end? Who's the potential audience? Those are some good revision questions to ask yourself.
That is great feedback or great advice for all of us. Now, I think that we could probably talk all night about project-based learning, and we lots of other, questions coming in, but our time is coming to an end. And I loved the last sentence, the last little paragraph in the book was really great. It just said, project-based learning is all about learning by doing. Not surprisingly, the same holds true for project-based teaching. It's through PBL and reflecting on your experience that you'll master the project-based teaching practices. So we need to practice, we need to do it, then we need to reflect. And I think you've given us some really great tools to be able to do that better in our classrooms.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's great. I wish, you all the best. It is definitely a journey. And I guess maybe one last kind of closing reflection thought. Yeah. We know that PBL has some great advantages for students, but what we hear from teachers is really encouraging. When teachers feel supported and are embarking on PBL with confidence, they often feel really refreshed in their teaching practice. They tend to collaborate more with their colleagues. Even teachers who have been at this for a long time will tell me, I feel new again. I feel like this is fresh again. I'm excited about teaching. And I think at a time, when we need to support our teaching profession as much as possible, that's a really nice message.
That definitely is. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah.
If your question did not get answered, feel free to tweet it out and we'll try to get back to you. And Suzie will try to get back to you as well. And Suzie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your expertise and your time.
Thanks for the invitation, Tracy. And good luck to all of you with what you're doing. It's wonderful.
Thank you. All right. See you all online soon. Bye.